Hey guys, welcome back once again to Reignited. Now this is a very special episode because we are introducing our brand new project vehicle. Now this is a 2010 Dodge Challenger RT, has a 6-speed manual transmission, and of course has a 5.7 Hemi engine. Now in this series, we're going to be focusing on a lot of the commonly done modifications that you guys are going to be doing at home. I'm talking about an intake, some exhaust modifications, and most importantly, we're going to be doing a cam swap on this thing. We're also going to be installing an aftermarket upgraded shifter assembly because I want a little bit more positive feel. That's what we're going to focus on in this episode, and hope you guys stay with me. All right, so as I mentioned, we're going to be installing an aftermarket shifter assembly in this video. Now, the stock shifter in there, if you're watching this video, I know that that stock shifter has a pretty vague feel. It's a little kind of all over the place. The throws are a little long. And I'm excited to see what this aftermarket shifter can do. I expect it to be a little bit more notchy, but at the same time, I expect a much more positive shift feel, and I'm expecting a shorter throw as well. Now, I went ahead and went with the Barton shifter, which seems to be the consensus among people for the best upgrade for these things. So let's go ahead and open this box up and take a look and see what we've got. We have a box within a box. Boy, this is a heck of a shifter assembly. Wow, look at this piece. This is very nice. As you can see, I went with the black knob with the white lettering for the different gears on there. I think this looks fantastic. And here's the shift arm itself, which as you can tell, I went with black anodized on there as well. I think overall this is going to be a very straightforward install. It doesn't look like we have to raise the vehicle at all. It looks like we can do it all from the top. Now granted, that's if we don't drop any of the hardware down the tunnel. We're gonna try to avoid that, but it looks like it'll be a very straightforward install. Let's get into it, guys. All right, so the very first step in our process is this trim ring here has to be disconnected from this console piece here. That way it can kind of slide up. Now there's just 4 pins essentially that are tension fit to hold this thing in place. So really you just kind of pry up on it and pop it off. Now some people, they like to use a plastic pry tool around the edge outside here. I don't like to do that. I don't think it works that well. I like to grab from the inside edge and just kind of pry upward with my hands there. And if you can kind of work around from side to side, eventually you get all of the pins to pop loose. Now I'll just flip this shifter boot up like that, and then now you can access the 2 13mm bolts that hold the shift handle assembly in place. So let's go ahead and get that loose now. All right, and now the shifter just slips out of place. All right, next on the list, this whole trim assembly here needs to come off. Go ahead and open up your console lid because it goes back all the way to here. And same thing with this, it's just held in by a tension fit. So you can just kind of pry upward on it and pop it loose. Just like that. There we go. Now, pay attention because there will be some electrical connectors that hold it in there. So go ahead and disconnect electrical connectors. There we go. All right, so set this aside so that you can install it later. Next step, we're going to remove the entire main console itself. If you look down at the front here, you have a Phillips head screw there and one on that side there. And then if you look at the rear of the console, you're going to see this little plastic tray down here at the bottom. What you need to do is you remove that tray, and underneath there are 4 8mm head bolts. There you go. So remove those 4 bolts and then remove those 2 Phillips head at the front, and the whole assembly will slide off. And there will be additional electrical connectors that need to be removed. When you're removing this console, the best option is to start from the back, pull the back up first, and then kind of walk it back out of there. Just like that. All right, so there's an additional connector right here. Okay. And the whole console just lifts out of the way. Now we want to remove this little air ducting here. Just kind of pull up on it, slide it back. There's no bolts or anything that hold it in place. There's this little kind of push pin connector here. It just pops right on out. Next step is to remove this little rubber cover guy that goes over the shifter assembly. There's a little wire holder here that just presses down over a stud. You just take a little pry tool, pop that guy right off of there, and then the whole rubber cover will just lift off. There is some little additional push pins here for the carpet. It looks like somebody has definitely been in here before because this is kind of, my rubber cover is torn up a little bit. But basically you just kind of pull these push pins back enough to get this rubber cover off of here. And it just slides off just like that. Now we're looking at the metal cover that goes over the whole entire shifter assembly. So it's held on by 3 10 mil nuts all the way around the circumference of it. And then you have this one 13 mm nut here that'll allow the shifter to drop down into the assembly itself. All right, let's go ahead and get this little rubber boot off of here. And now the plate. There we go. All right. No, it was just stuck down by time. So that's all it was. So just a little bit of persuasion there and she popped right off. Not too big of a deal. All right, now our shifter assembly is largely loose in here. All right, next step is to remove these pins right here. They'll flip down and then slide out. There's one on each side of the shifter assembly, so we need to remove both of those pins to continue. There it is right there. So you just basically flip them 90 degrees and then they slide out this way. Now, word of caution here, this is definitely something that could fall down onto the ground. So try to hold on to these as they come out. Now, the driver's side one is very, very simple. There's lots of room here, but it's definitely a little bit tighter here on the passenger side. So definitely a little bit more care will be needed on this side. All right, a little bit of a tight fit here on this one, but there we go. Passenger side one is out. Next item on the list, there's a little 10 mil head bolt here that as soon as you remove this, the entire shifter assembly will come out of the vehicle. Let's get that removed. Now the whole thing should just pop free. Just like that. All right, so we've got our new shifter ready to install here. The first thing we want to do is make sure that this portion of the shifter linkage actually fits in between the fork here like it's supposed to. All right, a little bit of wiggling there, but it looks like it does. So let's go ahead and reinstall this 10 mil bolt here. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and reinstall our shifter pins on both the left and right side. I've heard that it makes more sense to start with the passenger side first, get it partially installed, and then install the driver's side, and then seat them both home. All right, so we wiggled both of our pins back in place. They're just kind of loosely in there right now. I'm gonna go ahead and firmly seat them. I think that was probably the trickiest part of this whole deal so far, was getting those pins to line up, which honestly, it wasn't even that bad. But anyway, we'll go ahead and get these pins installed. That one's locked into place. Let's get this passenger side one. All right, next step is to install our little shifter bushing here. The important thing to note here is that the bolt head side goes towards the front of the shifter. So you just lift up the back here, slide that guy on. Next step, we're going to reinstall our metal plate, and this is when we install our supplied shifter boot here. Now you'll notice it says up and front here, so very easy. You won't be able to get this thing misaligned. Now, one thing you will want to do when you install this is you want to go ahead and put some Sil Glide on there or some sort of lubricant on the inside edge here, just so you don't get any rubber squeaking noises coming from the boot. All right, boot is in. I'm gonna go ahead and position that, and now I'm going to go ahead and lubricate this inner seal here. Now the shifter housing itself has an area where this boot is designed to rest, so make sure you are able to push that little boot down far enough to where it rests inside the location on the shifter housing. So a key step when you're installing this, make sure that you get this bolt to protrude a little bit just so you can get a nut started on there. You don't need to actually tighten it at this time, but just go ahead and get it started. All right, now what you can do is you can install your 6 10 mil nuts on this plate. really cinch it down, and then as you tighten this 13 mil bolt here, you're gonna need to use a screwdriver or something to help this rubber grommet actually seat at the base of the shifter assembly. All right, let's go ahead and start walking this boot in. There we go. All right, I'm gonna start tightening on this guy. Just want to do a final run around here and make sure that this boot is fully seated in the housing. There we go. All right, so the boot is seated on there. Now it's time to get the rubber cover back over the top. There we go. All right, time to put the lower console back into place. Before the console, we got to go ahead and put this AC vent back into place, your heater vent. Make sure to keep all your electrical connections clear here. You want to keep them from running underneath of here. And this just slides back into place here. Just like that. Now it's time for our lower console. Same as when we took it out, you'll want to make sure to come in at an angle, something like this, and then slide down. But go ahead and plug in your connector before you do so. All right, we are in place. All right, next step, we're gonna go ahead and reinstall our mid console. As before, remember to reconnect all of your connections. And just slip the front down first and then lock it into place. There we go. Mid console all the way in place. Now let's get our shifter installed. One of the best options about this shifter, in my opinion, is the adjustability to it, because when you install it in the vehicle, you can not only shift the angle of it this way and this way, but the handle itself also has an adjustment built into it. And I think that's really nice because you can really personalize it to your best feel and what feels most comfortable to you while driving. Now, to maximize your shifter adjustability, you want to put yourself squarely in the driver's seat so you can actually set the shifter on there and try it in various different positions before you lock it down. Now, this is held in place with 4 bolts in the front and 4 bolts in the rear. Let me tell you, one of the main things we're trying to do with this shifter is to take the slop out of it. Anytime you have a system like this that really locks it into place, that's really going to reduce any of that give that you have. If you take a look at the stock shifter assembly, you have just this one little shaft here. It looks like a 3/8 inch steel shaft that's held in place with 2 bolts. So all of your pressure when you're shifting is right here at the base of it, and that's going to have some give in it no matter what. So a system like this that just clamps around both sides, you can see how beefy this thing is, really going to eliminate a lot of our shifting slop. All right, let's get this thing installed. It's a nice tight fit around that shifter base as well. Just to show you guys some of the range of adjustability you have here. That's how much the base can actually swivel. And then of course you have the shifter assembly itself, which can move all the way forward. So I'm just gonna find the position that's most comfortable to me, and then I'm gonna go ahead and lock down those bolts. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that these bolts do have lock washers on them. You could add some Loctite to the bolts, but in my opinion, when you're dealing with 8 of these bolts, I don't think this is going anywhere. The stock shifter was held on by 2 bolts that were actually much smaller than these are. So this one being held on by 8, I don't think it's gonna back off anytime soon. Just tighten them down snug, you should be in good shape. The bolts for the shifter handle themselves are a 5mm Allen. Oh, wow. Okay, that is much shorter throw. I like that. That is going to be really nice. Wow, okay. I was expecting a shorter throw, but not that short a throw. Fantastic. Very good. Much, much better. Okay, now we're gonna move on to reinstalling the shifter boot. So for that to happen, we need to get rid of the shift knob on here. Get rid of this lock nut for the shift knob. All right, let's go get this shift boot off of the factory shifter. So on the factory shift boot, on the underside, there's this black plastic retainer that actually holds it in place to the shift lever. We need to actually remove this retainer. And there's an opening right here at the front where it kind of spreads apart and then lifts out. So we're gonna take our time, go real slow, try to get this retainer off in one piece. That way we don't damage the shift boot at all. There we go. Retainer's off. Now it's time to separate the shifter from the boot. Just that easy. So here's what we need to do now. We're going to go ahead and install this shift boot over the top of the aftermarket shifter. Now that shifter has a groove cut into it that the edge or the front leading edge of this shifter boot is going to sit in. And once we have the shifter boot on there properly, we'll take this supplied zip tie and actually wrap it around the boot and kind of trap it in that grooved location on the shifter. And then we can reinstall the shifter boot. I think out of the entire kit, this is the thing that's most like, wow, you're installing a zip tie on this thing. Like, it doesn't have a real professional solution. But to be perfectly honest, there's not a lot of good options really that they could have done. I think this is probably the cleanest way they could have done it. So even though it looks like it's like, well, you're installing a zip tie on this thing, still, I think it was probably their best choice that they had. I still think it's going to look really nice once it's installed. Let's do it. All right, so make sure that your bezel is oriented in the correct direction before you go putting this on here. Here is the grooved portion of the shifter that I was talking about that the shift boot needs to lay into. So you're gonna kind of just have to work it into that spot. Probably just gonna have to kind of walk it around the shifter assembly. Yeah, that seems to be working. There we go. Now we are fully on that groove. So now I'm going to hook our zip tie around here. Make sure I'm seated in the groove while I'm tightening the zip tie. Just clip off the little pigtail for the zip tie. And now reinstall the shifter bezel. All right, doesn't look too bad. Pretty clean overall. I can certainly live with that. And now it's time to install the shift ball. So put your lock nut on here. All right, so we're going to install it right about there. So this is a 19mm lock nut, so just go ahead and make sure your shift ball is in place as far as the orientation you want. There we go. Whew. This thing is a short shifter. Perfect. All right, let's take this thing for a drive, see what it's like. Oh, the shift feel. It's there. All right, there's 6 there. Wow, the shift engagement is incredibly improved. Very much so. You can actually feel which gear you're in. Oh. Sixth gear is taking me a little bit to get used to get it to slip in properly, but all the other gears feel really good. All right, there we go. Now I got her. Guys, the shift feel is so much improved. I know sometimes this sort of thing can be a little bit subjective, but I don't think there's any of that in this case, because this thing just feels so much cleaner, and I can actually feel what individual gear I'm going into, which is the entire point of an aftermarket shifter. Positive engagement, just click, click, click. It's got that nice short throw to it. So predictable, so much better. Now, one thing I am surprised about is that some of the reviews on this shifter had mentioned that you'll get a little bit more of the transmission noise coming out through the tunnel. It's called NVH, noise, vibration, or harshness. Anytime you go to a system with a more of a solid bushing and not dealing with rubber bushing, you're going to transmit more of that to the cabin. But to be honest, I'm not hearing that. None of that is coming through the cabin, and I could have dealt with a little bit of that. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but the boot that they supplied really helps keep that noise down, and I'm not hearing anything abnormal over the stock shifter that was in here. So from where I'm sitting right now, I'm seeing all benefit. I'm not seeing any detriment to this shifter at all. Now, is it worth essentially $500 for this shifter? Well, obviously that's going to be in the eye of the beholder there, but for me, if I'm driving a sports car, I want it to feel like I'm driving a sports car, and this shifter helps to accomplish that. All of a sudden, you feel like you're in something that maybe is even a little bit sportier than it actually is. But anyway, regardless, I'm loving this shifter, all positive. I think it's a win in my book. So there it is, Barton shifter is installed. My final thoughts on it are that it's very rare that you can come across an aftermarket component that only improves the quality of the vehicle, that doesn't detract from it in another way. But that seems to be the case with this shifter so far. I really, really love what it's done for the driving experience, the driving feel. And honestly, guys, that's what it's all about when you're modifying your car. Does it make you want to get in and drive the vehicle more? If it does, it's a good modification to have made. So in my opinion, I feel like this whole shifter assembly is absolutely worth the money. It was a worthwhile upgrade. And for whoever gets this car next, I think it's going to be really, really fun for them to drive. All right, you guys, thank you so much for always watching, always supporting everything. If you want to pick up a t-shirt to help support me, it's reignitedtx.com. You can follow me on Instagram at reignited.tx. And as always, thank you for absolutely everything you've done, and we'll see you next time on Reignited.